You might be wondering, why does Illustrator have two selection tools up at the top of the tools panel? Well, they have two distinct purposes, and in this lesson you'll learn the difference, and you'll also learn about grouping and isolation mode. So go ahead and go to File, New, and just create a new document. I'm creating one at letter size, but as long as we have some room to work with. At first I'm going to show you the differences between selecting and direct selecting. So click and hold on to the rectangle tool on the tools panel and go to the ellipse tool, or just press L on the keyboard. I'm going to click and drag out. I'm going to hold shift for a perfect circle. And then I'm going to draw another one over here. And so we have two circles. Right? So if you choose the selection tool, which is the black arrow, if you click here on the path or the fill, because it doesn't have a transparent fill, in this example it actually has a white fill and a black border or stroke, it adds this bounding box here, right? So this bounding box, you can actually click and drag a corner and you can resize a shape. You can hold shift if you want to maintain the original proportion, and you can also hover off the edge and it becomes that double-sided arrow, and then you can click and drag and rotate it. You can't really tell because it's a circle, but if I just created an ellipse, for example, and then use the black arrow and rotate, you can see you can rotate it. And a quick shortcut, if you want to duplicate something, instead of going to edit copy and then edit paste and pasting a new object, you can actually just hold down to Alt on the PC or Option on the Mac and click and drag, and that will duplicate a shape. Now when we choose the white arrow, which is the direct selection tool, it's a little bit different. Now if I do click and drag on the inside here or on the fill, it does move it just as if we had the selection tool selected. It just doesn't have that bounding box. However, if I just click and drag on a path here, click and drag, you can see that now I am adjusting the path itself. If I hold down shift, it has a little bit different effect. See how it's symmetrical on either side and it's just going out. If I let go of shift, then you can actually make one side or the other a little bit more curved. Now if you have the direct selection tool selected and you click right on an anchor point, say for example this, we have an anchor point right there, you can click and drag and move that. Instead of the path, now I'm just clicking and dragging a point or an anchor point that is between the paths. If I hold shift, then it will keep it constrained to specific areas. And then you'll notice these handles on the edge, you can just click and drag and that will change the curve of that path. Now there are a couple shortcuts to remember. If you hold down Alt on the PC or Option on the Mac, again that's click and drag and you can duplicate it. If you hold down Control though, what it does is it toggles it to the other selection. So if I have the selection tool selected and I hold down Control or Command on the Mac, and now it's toggled it to the direct selection tool. So if I have the selection tool here, the black arrow, and I hold down Control on the PC or Option on the Mac and I click and drag, now I'm actually adjusting the path as if I had the white arrow selected because it's toggled to the other selection tool. If I let go of Control or Command, then it goes back to the one we have selected. Likewise, if I have the direct selection tool selected and I come over here and I press Control on the PC or Command on the Mac and click and drag, now I'm just moving it around as if I had the black arrow or the selection tool selected. If I don't have Control or Command selected and click and drag, then it's just, I have to deselect, click off in the background, and then click and drag the path, and now I'm moving the path. And again, I can move the anchor point, path, or the handles in between, or the entire object with the white arrow or the direct selection tool. Now if you click and hold onto the direct selection tool, you'll see the group selection tool. You might be thinking, well, what is that? Well, I'm going to give you a simple example. I'm going to draw a couple shapes out. I'm going to change the color here, double click the middle here, just come up with some other color. And then I'm going to draw some shapes out here. And so we've got 5 circles, right? Let's say we were combining them later to be a cloud with a pathfinder. We'll cover that in a different lesson, but we just have 5 circles here. Now by default, if I click one, I can move them around obviously individually because they're not grouped. And then with the white arrow, you could also move them around, or you can click and drag and adjust the size. So let's go ahead and group these, because to understand the group selection tool, we need to use grouping first. I also need to explain isolation mode. So these two right here, I'm going to click that one, and then I'm going to click this one over here, and now they're both selected. I held shift, or you can click and drag like that. You can use the direct selection tool or the selection tool when you're holding shift, or if you're just clicking and drag both of them. Let's use the selection tool for this example. You just click and drag so you're hovering over those. So now you see the bounding box. It's easy to see what's selected. Then go to Object and then Group, or the shortcut is Control-G on the PC or Command-G on the Mac. And now those are grouped. Now if I select them, I'm moving both of those automatically if I have the selection tool selected. If I choose the direct selection tool, well then I can move individual pieces of, even if it's grouped with another piece. Now with this selected, let's go ahead and select this grouped area, and I'm going to hold Shift, and now I have these three selected, and I'm just going to go to Object, Group again. Now these are grouped, and let's just select this one here as well, and now these four will be grouped, Object, Group. And then finally, let's just click and drag around all these here and go to Object, Group. Now, why do we want to group those in layers? It's to show you how isolation mode works and also how the group selection tool works. So with the black arrow or the selection tool, if I click, it selects the entire group. If I select the white arrow or the direct selection tool, I can move these individually, and if I double click, it doesn't do anything. If I go back to the black arrow, this selection tool, and let's just say I double click on one of these, you'll notice up here it changes a little bit. It's got layer 1 and then group. If I double click on this one here, it goes down another group. Double click on this one, double click on this one, double click on this one. And you'll notice it's going through multiple layers of groups down to the path. That's the current isolated object. What that means is I can actually edit this, even though I don't have the white direct selection tool selected, I just have the black selection tool selected. Now I can double click on the outside and I'll go to the top level, or I can double click and go back down those levels. Now I'm editing this with the selection tool. I can double click on to escape out of there, click over here. So why is that useful? Well, what you can do is, let's just say these three you wanted to edit. You can edit those, click and drag, because I'm on that specific level within isolation mode. Isolation mode just means you're only editing that one shape because you've double clicked on it with the selection tool. And then to go back to the top level, just double click out here. If you click and hold onto the white arrow, the direct selection tool, and go to the group selection tool, how that works is if I just click on this, it only selects this by default, just like if I had the direct selection tool selected. If I double click, then it selects these four, because those are all grouped. Likewise, if I click here, double click, then it selects these three. If I click this, double click, it selects all five, because that was the last one that was grouped with these other four. So if you had some complicated illustration that had a bunch of different shapes that were grouped in different levels, you can click or double click and then move that around, or click again and it selects more. Notice I don't have to double click though. So if I click once, click again, click again, click again, click again, it selects more of those shapes that are grouped because I grouped them all in different steps. So if I click and click, 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 move it over, click again, then move it over. That is the group selection tool. So that's the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. I think if you practice it, you'll get a lot better at it and you'll get used to why you would use one or the other. And again, we can use those shortcuts like the Control or Command key to toggle in between the two. I will see you in the next lesson.